The Yakuza / Like a Dragon franchise is ripe with fun games. Even the weakest entries have areas that most people could enjoy, from the main story to the incredible range of side content going from combat to all the different minigames. There's a lot to appreciate here. As the games go on, they introduce plenty of amazing quality of life features that make your experience even more pleasant to go through. Gotta give a huge shout out to Infinite Wealth's taxi selection on the map, where you can just pick whichever taxi you want to fast travel to and boom, you're there. You don't have to worry about going through different menus or walking to the nearest taxis as you did in the previous games. But having said that, these games can also take weirdly backward steps that make you question how they could have missed such a thing, especially when it's something they've already had before. For example, they may introduce a feature only for them to just not have it in the next game, or they might bring back a pre-established feature, but it's downgraded for seemingly no reason. So in today's video, I'll be going through 10 different things about the Yakuza games that I miss and I want to see returning in some way. These things, as you'll see, will range from features that are insignificant in the grand scheme of things, to game-defining features that heavily affect the direction of how a game plays out. So, join me as we go through them. Yakuza 6, in more ways than one, is an experimental game despite being a mainline title. After all, it was the introduction of the Dragon engine, and anytime we have a whole new engine, it is a big deal. While far from perfect, Yakuza 6 had many things about it that remain unique to it, and it sets it apart from many of the later games. One such thing is the ability to buy a drink from a vending machine and drink it in real time as soon as you buy it. You hold a button and you just see Kiryu chugging down that bad boy. It's something that's very reminiscent of Shenmue. The next Dragon Engine game, Yakuza Kiwami 2, completely gets rid of this. So now when you buy a vending machine drink, it gets added to your inventory, which certainly does have its advantages as well, because a lot of these drinks from the vending machine you can only get the effects from these drinks. The perfect blend would be to have the option to drink it right away or store it in the inventory, but alas, the latter would be the only option going forward. Judgment and Lost Judgment actually completely get rid of the vending machines as a feature. In Kiryu's Gaiden as well, for some strange reason, you can't access the vending machines at all, but it remains available in Yakuza 7 and Yakuza 8. But just like Kiwami 2, you can only add the drinks to your inventory and you can't actually drink them real time. So, by nature of this particular topic, this obviously only applies to the beat-em-up games, but over the years we've seen different takes on the upgrade system with the RGG games. The first 3 games had the very simplistic skill categories that you have to gradually progress in. Then Yakuza 4 introduced a point-based system where every time you level up, you get a few points and then you can choose pretty much any ability you want. Weirdly enough, a bunch of the games after 4 go backwards rather than continue using the system and improving it even more. This includes even a fan favorite like Yakuza 0. Yakuza 6 and Yakuza Kiwami 2 had a system that is probably my second favorite after Yakuza 4's, where it's based on points as well, but you'd mainly get those points by eating food on an empty stomach. But you could still abuse that system to get plenty of abilities early on if you know what you're doing. The Judgment games are a 50-50. In the first one, the main way to really farm for those SP points is by drinking a crap ton of hug bombs, which takes quite a bit of time and a whole bunch of money. While in Lost Judgment, I found it very easy to just get SP points through random encounters, which I really like. Kiryu's Gaiden had a bit of a weird blend between Yakuza 0 and Yakuza 4, to where you can technically pick any ability you want, but you need money instead of skill orbs or experience. And some abilities need another currency called the Akame points, which basically forces you to do all the side quests that she has. So it can get a bit tedious, especially since this game doesn't have New Game Plus. So going forward, I sincerely hope we get back the amazing convenience of an upgrade system akin to that of Yakuza 4, because it's just fantastic. So this is a bit of a broad point. There's a lot about the Yakuza games that I enjoy, but if there's one thing I can point out, it's that it feels like some of the games sometimes don't want you to reach the finish line, and so they throw a whole bunch of stuff at you to slow you down. Now, I realize to an extent that pretty much all games do this, but the degree in which they do it varies greatly. Take Dondoku Island in Infinite Wealth, for example. It's a fun side activity that you can sink hours into. And I get that they wanted to introduce such a major minigame in a very noticeable way so that no one misses it, but the execution leaves a bit to be desired. It doesn't matter how acquainted you are with the game. If you're replaying this game, you're forced to spend a minimum of 20 minutes here before you can actually leave and continue with the story. I think that's kind of borderline inexcusable. You should have been given the option to not go at least on the second playthrough onwards. The first Judgment game, as another example, is a pretty long game even if you do just the story. Thank you, tailing missions. Tailing missions aren't the only culprit here though, even if they are the major one. This game implements at least a few side cases in the main story as if it's trying to get you to spend some time elsewhere for a bit. Yakuza 2, whether OG or Kiwami, is another big one for me. Multiple times throughout the story, you'll be told to just do whatever until the story can progress. And it's nice to motivate you to explore what the game has, but I always prefer being given the option and not being made to sit through what I already experienced. Surprisingly, one of the games that did this best is OG Yakuza 1. A lot of the story is just you going from point A to point B for either dialogue or fight. Though I will mention that one point where you have to gather about 300,000 yen for the Shangri-La Pass. But by far, one of the things that aged best from OG 1 is also how straight to the point training with Kamaki is. I mentioned this in the 19th anniversary video, but he'll teach you a move, you go out to apply it as you progress through the story, you come back and you learn more. Rinse and repeat. Meanwhile, in Kiwami, they wanted you to grind for these scrolls in the Colosseum, and they can take at least a few hours. The Dragon Engine introducing the skipping of whole conversations is also extremely helpful for cutting the tedium, though as I said not long ago, a few games in that engine still find a way to drag things. I want to see RGG Studio learning from all this and make it so that side content stays side content, and it doesn't get pushed onto you constantly one way or another. This is mainly a product of the Judgment games, but it's weird how in those games, you don't get access to the higher tiers of the energy drinks, or at least not readily. You're gonna find out quick that you're able to buy Stamina X and Toughness Z and Tarner from most convenience stores, but then as you progress through the game, you'll just end up noticing the weird lack of the higher variants, like Stamina Double X or Stamina Royale. This wasn't ever really elaborated on, and it just sort of happened with the Judgment games. In the first Judgment, the pharmacy in Kamurocho is absent, and to my knowledge, you just can't get anything beyond the first variant of each energy drink. In Lost Judgment, even though the pharmacy is there, and Yokohama also has 2 other pharmacies, the higher variants are once again absent. However, it is worth noting that there are a couple of limited ways for you to get Stamina and Spark, in Lost Judgment specifically. If I remember correctly, one of them is obtainable through beating a challenge in the Gauntlet, and then you can receive it as a reward in Yagami's Mail. And the other way, depending on your platform, is either a DLC or is in the base game waiting for you to claim in the mail. Literally the only excuse I can think of as to why they did this is because they wanted to keep the energy drinks mainly a Yakuza thing, while they have a small cameo in the Judgment games. But if that's the case, it's like, why have the energy drinks in Judgment at all? Especially when you can carry a limited amount of them and they heal about the same as they do in the Yakuza games, which isn't too much. A compromise would be to have these lesser variants as a cameo but have them heal more, or just include the higher variants and be done with it. Because with mods, it was proven that they are in the game files. For what you'd think would be a complete next evolution, Lost Judgment and Infinite Wealth took a step or two back in some of its convenience features. Lost Judgment reduced the amount of shortcut heals you could equip from 3 to 1 compared to its predecessor, while Infinite Wealth took away skill shortcuts completely. No matter how you think about it, these decisions just make no sense, especially when Lost Judgment brings so much seamlessness into the combat compared to the first game, and then with Infinite Wealth bringing all the improvements that it did as well compared to 7. This just makes me think of all the times RGG introduced great features that ended up being exclusive to one or a few games, despite the fact that there are other games that would probably benefit even more from said features. Not too different from what we talked about in the previous point. It makes me wish there's some kind of quality of life idea guy in the team whose job is solely to keep track of all the neat features in all the games, so that they don't forget about them moving forward. Kinda like how some dev teams have a lore person whose job is to just hit the books. This is definitely a product of the PS3 era, and I honestly don't think we'll see them coming back again purely because it's the definition of a product of its time. It was a way for RGG Studio to demonstrate their creativity in a way few developers did at the time. Installing games on the PlayStation 3 used to take a good amount of time, anywhere between less than a minute and potentially going up to over 15 minutes depending on how big the game is. So, to keep you company with some cool visuals and also amazing music, RGG Studio whipped up these incredible creations that are just so good to have in the background as you wait for the game to be installed. Within the Yakuza franchise itself, this was pioneered by Yakuza 4, and then other games that would have this are Yakuza Dead Souls, Yakuza 5, only in Japan though, Ishin, Yakuza 0, and Yakuza Kiwami. With Yakuza 0 and Kiwami in particular, you could still see these install screens if you're not on the PS3, free of any overlays as well in the cutscene viewer, and you can take a gander at the gorgeous cinematics if you want to see what they look like. One compromise would be to make cutscenes like this and include them as a bonus in the cutscene viewer, but it's such an insignificant thing that I just don't see them going for it ever again. A true classic. The last game to truly have an intro as we know them is Yakuza Kiwami. You might be thinking about something like the Judgment intros and you're wondering, what do we define as an intro here? Well, let's put it this way. The last game to have an opening cinematic when you launch the game is Yakuza Kiwami. So it's true that both Judgment games have intros, but for some reason, you only see them past a certain story point in the beginning of a playthrough. Gaiden did the same thing, and then Infinite Wealth also did the same thing. I feel like they could have easily taken those same cinematics and just slapped them right before you get to the main menu, but they didn't. This, in my opinion, takes away from part of the charm some previous games had to where you launch the game and you get an exciting cinematic right away that shows you what to expect, and they play really hype tracks to go with it. Now, as far as I've seen, this actually became something of a point of debate in the community some time back. Some argued that the older intros contained spoilers that they would have preferred not to see. Others would say that the intros have no context, so we don't really know what's going on, and we would still have to play the game to fully understand the scenes we witness in the intros. It feels like RGG heard this feedback, and that's why they came up with what we got in Lost Judgment, where instead of a compilation of in-game cutscenes, it's a whole new cutscene made specifically to be an intro without any story moments. And I gotta say, they've done a phenomenal job on these. My only complaint now is just the fact that I think these should play every time you launch the game as they used to. And if you don't want to see it, you can just skip it every time as we always did. But if you wanted a banger to hype you up and get you in the mood, well, you'd be getting it. I know this is a fairly new thing and we've only ever had a single optional party member in the two turn-based games we currently have, which was Eri in Yakuza Like a Dragon, but this idea has an insane amount of untapped potential that I think RGG has yet to fully realize. And I really hope they do with the next Ichiban game. Development-wise, the best part about having optional party members is that they have pretty much zero involvement in the story matters. So you'd give them a side bonding storyline and that would be 99% of their lines. But despite their minimal involvement, they'd still function as a full-fledged party member that can become the absolute best in your team. For us, the players, it would just give us more characters to pick a favorite from, and gives us a chance to diversify our team setup. Heck, I would be completely fine if we could unlock optional party members who don't even have a bonding storyline at all. Just give me characters that I can put in my party at any time and I'd be happy. I think the way Yakuza 7 handled it to where you unlock Eri after finishing the business minigame was perfect. It's very similar to how you unlock secret styles for Majima and Kiryu in Yakuza 0, and in future games if they ever bring this idea back, they could have you unlock someone in a similar fashion, or even in new ways that don't require as much of a time investment, but instead might take a bit of exploration for you to come across. Here's a crazy one that you probably didn't think much of. Let me ask you a question. Prior to Infinite Wealth, when was the last time we had a proper trainer that took it upon themselves to teach you a few moves? Gaiden didn't have any. Lost Judgment didn't have any. 7 didn't have any. Judgment didn't have any. Yakuza 6 didn't have any. The last actual game to have them that isn't a remaster or a remake is Yakuza 0, and that game came out in 2015 for Japan and 2017 for the rest of us. So if you really want to, you could say the last time was with Lost Paradise if you even want to count that game, which is still an absurdly long time since it came out in 2018. That's why when Infinite Wealth introduced Asakura, a real-life MMA fighter who teaches you some of his specials, I was pretty ecstatic. I know that 7 also has moves that you can learn from the business minigame, which is still really nice, but it's not the same. I also realized that the first Judgment has the QR codes you can scan for some unlockable moves, but that's even less impressive than 7's acquirable moves. Having a combat teacher only got more interesting throughout the earlier games, because you got to meet interesting new ones eventually, like Saigo or Nair. And Nair had a whole story to her, which only made her that much better. She's definitely one of my favorite trainers because of all that. Having said that, that's why I gotta give a big shout out to Infinite Wealth for finally taking it upon itself to have a combat master figure after all this time. But I also sincerely hope they only keep improving this aspect going forward. It would be a huge shame and a bummer to see them just going back to not having anyone in the next games. This concerns one feature that I made a whole video about a while ago, but Yakuza Dead Souls has a feature in Premium Adventure which allows you to revisit basically any story battle without actually being in the story mode. This saves you the headache of having to make like 100 different saves for each and every part of the story that you like and may want to revisit again in the future. I'd like to extend this point by saying that a chapter select feature would also go a long way as an alternative, but if I had to guess, I think with the technicalities of the RGG games, a story battle replay mode is probably easier for them to do than a chapter select. But I'm no game dev, so I could be very wrong. The best case scenario would be we get both and it would be a win-win for everyone. I sincerely believe that just having features like these would elevate people's opinions of any given RGG game. So if anyone from RGG Studios is listening, please do consider this. And with all that out of the way, I think we're at the end of this video. What do you guys think of my list? Is there maybe something else that you want to see returning in some capacity that I haven't already mentioned? I wouldn't at all dismiss the possibility that there are a whole bunch of ideas that I just didn't think of. So I'd like to see what you guys come up with. Which ones on this list do you agree with? Go ahead and type all your thoughts down below in the comments, and maybe let's have a conversation. As usual, I just want to say thank you for taking the time of your day to stop by and watch my content. It really does mean the world, and I also just want to say that I hope you're having a great day, and if you're not, hang in there, buddy. Things will hopefully get better with time. Thank you so much for continuing to watch my content, and I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye now.